is the priority, Mr. Speaker, of this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. And again, I'm more than pleased to again remind all members of this House of the $6 million investment, Mr. Speaker, that we made, that the Liberals supported us last week, Mr. Speaker, in services for persons with disabilities, that the NDP said, no, not going to support.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Justice. Yesterday, in response to a question, the Minister of Justice stated, when the government became aware of the situation, the appropriate measures were taken.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova has the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today in the media, the Department of Labour says it is investigating how Cape Breton Correctional Centre employees learned about the asbestos-lined pipes at the facility. What I'm hearing from the guards is that they learned about the asbestos on May the 14th from a maintenance worker who was told of the asbestos and had it confirmed by management on May the 15th. So my question to you, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Justice, why was the Joint Health and Safety Committee not informed immediately as called for in the Code of Practice?
Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova is correct. The maintenance workers were aware because they were part of the process and the policies and procedures, and they were following and doing their due diligence, just as we expect them to do.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Nova on his first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the appropriate measures were not taken. Asbestos was confirmed in the facility on April the 25th, and the guards did not get confirmation until May the 15th. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister of Workforce Development and Labour, Minister of Labour and Workforce Development, is does he consider that time lag appropriate in meeting the Code of Practice set out by his department?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice, Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I've reiterated my answer several times. The Occupational Health and Safety Division is investigating the internal responsibility system and have produced 2 reports, and I'm sure more information will be coming in the future. And I leave that up to them because this minister will not interfere one way or the other with the work of occupational health and safety. It's too important an issue to let it denigrate into petty politics.
The Honourable the Member for Cape Breton Nova on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the Code of Practice was not followed. The Minister of Labour said last night that in view, immediately would mean immediately. That's what the policy is. And we were informed, the Department of Justice, that they have to adhere to it. So, Mr. Speaker, my question to you, to the Minister is, so with this Minister's grasping on the meaning of immediate, does he feel the Department of Justice followed the Department of Labour's Code of Practice?
Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and to the honourable member from Cape Breton Nova, who seems to feel that politics is more important than people. We have taken the measures, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that the safety, the well-being, the security of the public, inmates and employees are adhered to. What that member knows is upon the receipt of the report. The report, Mr. Speaker, that said that the safety of the air quality was within acceptable limits, the goodwill of the department to follow up and on the union ask to have a further report, which was done, which was released today, Mr. Speaker, which is in safe limits. That's what we will continue to do. That is the action, and anything that's come to my attention, I have acted immediately. If only they will get to their immediate sentences, we get on with better government in this province.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, the Provincial Health Services Operational Review, which we know as the Corpus Sanchez Report, outlines some recommendations around the delivery of health services in rural Nova Scotia. Most specifically, recommendation number 23 states that the Department of Health establish a rural health task force made up of individuals from community health boards, district health authorities, business people and private citizens to develop a rural health strategy. So my question for the Minister is, could he please indicate whether this Rural Health Task Force has been appointed?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. No, the full task force has not been appointed. What we are right now is working with our partners, the district health authorities, to basically pick chairs for issues like the rural health strategy, like the model of care, like the other pieces that need to be happening. Once we have those chairs in place, then we can start populating the positions on those task force.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, yesterday I asked the Premier whether certain hospitals across this province would be designated as primary care centres or community health centres and may not have a 24/7 emergency department as recommended by Corpus Sanchez and endorsed by his government. He indicated there would be no closures of emergency departments. This report, which the government endorsed wholeheartedly, indicates otherwise. So my question for the minister is, will the Rural Health Task Force be told that emergency room closures are not an option, as the Premier indicated yesterday, or will this government allow them to make closure recommendations and then use them as an excuse as to why that needs to be done?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, Mr. Speaker, the idea behind a rural health strategy is to find methods and ways to keep ERs open, to better serve those populations. And Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the work that's going to be done by that task force.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the healthcare system throughout this province is in crisis, and it's being felt most acutely in rural Nova Scotia. Health human resource issues are becoming strained and will only get worse. Without lab techs, without nurses and x-ray techs, doctors will not have the supports to practice. So my question for the minister is, will the minister please direct that Rural Health Task Force to examine the issues around health human resources as they pertain to rural communities as soon as possible before it really becomes too late?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, again, over the last number of weeks and months, I've been visiting communities, visiting chambers of commerce, visiting Rotary clubs, talking about the issues in healthcare. And Mr. Speaker, we are not sitting out there and saying that everything's rosy. Mr. Speaker, we know there's some issues, especially when it comes to the human health resource issues. Mr. Speaker, we know we're going to have challenges going into the future, and I know that this rural health strategy will be one that will strengthen healthcare in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question through you is to the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia. We all know the valuable service that volunteer firefighters provide in our communities. And today, the fire department in Caribou, just outside the town of Pictou, is dealing with a very serious situation that in the event of an emergency, they could have no one to drive their fire trucks. The 3 members who hold an air brake endorsement could be unavailable due to work commitments, and the department needs help in getting more drivers trained as soon as possible. So my question to the minister is, what steps is he prepared to take to help the Caribou Volunteer Fire Department and others like it around our province that are short of qualified drivers?
The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. One of the things that I can tell the honourable member is that the firefighters' tax credit was being enhanced this year, and he voted against it.
The Honourable the Member for Pictou West on his first supplementary.
Okay, well, Mr. Speaker, it's a very serious problem.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, it's a very serious problem. The problem is that in order to drive the fire truck, volunteers must take a course and then they must complete a written test. And for many, the way the training and the tests are structured requires considerable time and travel by anyone trying to get the air brake endorsement. So one suggestion that's come to me is that by the Board of Directors in the Caribou Volunteer Fire Department was perhaps that the trainers could travel to meet the firefighters instead of the other way around. So my question to the Minister, what steps will he take to get his department to examine this suggestion and any other means of ensuring availability of drivers for volunteer fire trucks?
The Honourable the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. And as members of this House will know, that last year this government made an outstanding commitment to emergency responders in the province, a commitment of about $8.5 million. and there was more included in this year's budget, which the honourable member voted against. And Mr. Speaker, the issue of human resources for volunteer fire departments is no question. He raises an important issue, and it's one that's difficult right across the province, and that's why, among other things, the province has supported the volunteer firefighters the way we did last year, and has also upped the volunteer firefighters tax credit, and again an increase next year to try and encourage more people to join volunteer fire brigades.
The honourable the member for Pictou West on his final supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, my question is to the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia. Residents in our communities depend on these volunteers to protect the health and the safety of their families and their homes. And gaps in this vital service is exposing people to increased risk. Today in Caribou, there's nobody to drive the fire trucks. So I'm asking, when can the volunteer fire department in Caribou expect to hear from this minister about a solution to training and testing for air brake endorsement?
The honourable the member of Service, Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, other than refer to the excellent mutual aid system that we have in Nova Scotia, I want to refer that to the minister responsible, the Minister of Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have put, as a government, $500,000 towards beginning. Did they vote against that as well? Hypocrisy.
Order, please.
Thy name is...
Order.
We have $500,000 that hopefully, well, with the support of the party opposite and our leadership, will go forward to help with a mobile training unit, and it's just the start of an enhanced training program that we intend to offer to our firefighters. And so we've already started with $500,000, and we'll be moving more aggressively in the future in our next budget.
The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture. This past week, we witnessed a blockade by Inverness Harbour by Nova Scotia fishers over the allocation of lucrative crab quota. In my area, there is much anger arising from Irish moss harvesters who wish to expand from District 12 to 11 to be able to sustain their livelihood. However, these decisions are being made in Ottawa in regards to our quotas and are hurting our coastal communities. My question to the minister is, what is he doing to deal with the poor management of our fishery in Ottawa?
The honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for that question. His first, I guess he had a few questions there. His first question was on the Inverness issue on the weekend. We had a very good meeting down there yesterday. I myself and my executive assistant were in Inverness and met with the fishermen. The Premier was there on the weekend and met with the fishermen. DFO had a meeting with the fishermen on Monday, and that issue is being worked on with Ottawa, and we will continue to work with that. As for the issue with the Irish moss, that's an issue that has to be addressed by both areas, Area 12 and 11, I believe it is, and until they get a resolve among themselves as to that fishery, we will continue to work with them. Thank you.
Honourable the member for Shelburne on his first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Now that I got his attention, I want to add a couple more questions here. Mr. Speaker, fishermen this year has been required to return scalpings as an incidental caught fish, but traditionally has been used as bait. Fishermen are quite worried about the potential of having cuss placed on a species of risk list and the major impact this will have on our lucrative lobster fishery. My question is, what plans does this minister have to bring these issues forward to his federal counterpart?
Honourable the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Well, again, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the honourable member for that question. I mean, we did have a debate here, late debate last night. That was the topic that we discussed. Our Department of Fisheries and Agriculture, we realize the impact that listing of cusk would have on the lobster fishery. We don't agree with the science that has been presented by DFO, and we have made that very clear to DFO and the minister. We will continue to to continue that battle, and we will work with them to try to get a resolve to that.
The Honourable, the member for Shelburne on his final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Fishers across Nova Scotia have a number of issues, such as low catches, crews paying for quotas, and now are plagued by high fuel costs and the highest WCB rates in Atlantic Canada. Will the minister call on the federal minister to carry out a review of the issues facing our troubled fisheries and work with the communities to develop solutions?
The Honourable, the Minister of Fisheries and Agriculture.
Well, again, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And we work on a daily basis with the Department of Fisheries and Oceans for the betterment of all the fishery in the province of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I guess I look around and I think to myself, and I look at all the members at the fishery, how important, how many ministers or members of the legislature, that how important the fishery is to us all. Yes. And that member over there, the member from Shelburne, Mr. Chairman, has voted against the largest investment in the fisheries in the last 30 years in the province of Nova Scotia. Whoa. He voted against it. A loans for license program that we have implemented. The member from Queens, Mr. Speaker, the member from Queens, a large fishing community. How did she vote? She voted no. The member from Pictou West voted no. The member from Pictou East voted no. All very, very intense fishing communities. And you look across, and you see all of them voted against. All of them voted against the fishery, Mr. Speaker. So,
Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Mr. Speaker, we know how important on this side the fishery is, and we will continue to work with the fishermen, not like the NDP.
Order, please. The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hope I can get equal time here. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Premier. Mr. Speaker, early last week we learned that the federal Conservatives will once again be moving a Coast Guard vessel out of Nova Scotia, the Cap Pierce from the Sydney Coast Guard College. On Thursday, May 15th, the Premier stated he had sent a letter to the Prime Minister to stay the moving of this vessel to Quebec. It's almost been a week since that letter, since the Premier informed us about that letter. Will the Premier inform the House whether or not he's received a response from the Prime Minister?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, not to my knowledge as yet, I have not seen a response to the letter which was sent, Mr. Speaker, but I certainly will check with my office if one has been received today or in the last 24 hours. So I will make it known to the House, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South on his first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, on Monday, May 12th, Prime Minister Harper was in Halifax watching a hockey game. And obviously, Mr. Speaker, on the advice of the Provincial Minister of Tourism, on Wednesday, the Premier stated, on the matter of the Cap Pierce, and I quote, "I did not have a heads up, and I would have brought it up to the attention of the Prime Minister if I had," close quote. So my question to the Premier, if the lines of communication are so great between you and your federal cousins, why didn't the Prime Minister give you a heads up on this matter when he was literally up the street?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, the lines of communication between myself and the Prime Minister are very good, and this government and the federal government. That's why we signed an infrastructure agreement over $600 million, Mr. Speaker, for the people of this province. That's why, Mr. Speaker, we are settling a 20-year issue which the previous federal Liberal government wouldn't deal with, that being the Crown share, which will enhance the future opportunities for young people in this province, Mr. Speaker, in the years ahead.
The Honourable, the member for Cape Breton South on his final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, this is a third announcement in just over a year that will move important vessels from the shores of Nova Scotia's coastline. It's clear that the federal government is playing political games with the province of Nova Scotia, while the Premier obviously is kept out of the loop. This 3 times in the last year there are ships have been moved out of Nova Scotia, 2 up here and 1 in the Coast Guard College in Sydney. Mr. Speaker, the plain fact is this: the college in Sydney needs this ship. It provides hands-on experience for cadets and allows instructors to keep up their professional expertise. It's now 3 ships and counting. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, How many more ships will be taken from us before the Premier stands up for Nova Scotia and stands up for the people of our province? Mr. Speaker, we need the Premier to speak on behalf of the people who are attending the Coast Guard College in Sydney to have the Cap Pierce returned to Point Edward.
The Honourable the Premier. The Honourable the Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure Renewal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member opposite for the question. It's a very good question, both for this province and for the Coast Guard College. I can tell you, Mr. Speaker, the morning that we became aware of the issue, my office made immediate contact with Mr. McKay's office in Ottawa, as well. We also documented to the Federal Minister of Fisheries our concern and displeasure with this vessel being moved. And Mr. Speaker, I can assure the honourable member this government and this minister will continue to dialogue with the Federal Minister of ACOA and as well the Federal Minister of Fisheries to ensure that that Coast Guard College is secure for many years in the future in this province, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and my questions for the Minister of Community Services. As the Minister knows, working families need childcare. And in my constituency, many of those families qualify for the portable subsidies which help them afford care for their children while they are at work. But there's only a very limited number of spaces, and very, very few of those are for preschool care, licensed, in the Spryfield area, and there are absolutely none in the communities further out. So even those families living in the urban core have very few options for childcare, none for childcare before the age of 4 years old, and the situation is even worse in outlying communities. My question to the Minister is, why is there a population of over 20,000 people anywhere in this province which is served by less than 100 licensed childcare spaces?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank my honourable colleague for the opportunity to rise, Mr. Speaker, to speak of the $200 million childcare plan put in place by this government, Mr. Speaker. That $200 million plan Mr. Speaker, has a wide variety of components to it, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, one of those components, of course, concerns subsidy. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to address the issue of subsidy, Mr. Speaker. It was just last month, Mr. Speaker, that indeed we, on this side of the House, recognized the importance to have subsidy for Nova Scotian families. We increased the income allowance, Mr. Speaker, for families, for those hard-working families in Nova Scotia, to ensure that they were better able to access subsidized spaces, Mr. Speaker. At the same time we did that, Mr. Speaker, we also decreased the daily fee, Mr. Speaker, from $2.25 a day to $1 a day, Mr. Speaker. Concrete, practical, real solutions for Nova Scotian families who require that quality childcare that we deliver here in Nova Scotia each and every day, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Halifax Atlantic on our first supplementary.
Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, that response simply does not answer the question of how a population of 20,000 people can be expected to need fewer than 100 licensed childcare spaces. The Minister should be well aware that Spryfield is one of the areas with some of the highest concentrations of lone parent families in the province. Even those families with two parents find that often both parents need to work to make ends meet. The parents want to work, the Minister says she wants them to work, but the fact of the matter is it's not even legal to leave your children at home while you go to work. So I ask the Minister, where is the licensed childcare where those subsidies can be used in this community?
Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
Again, Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity to rise and speak, Mr. Speaker, of the millions of dollars of investment, Mr. Speaker, made in the child care plan. Mr. Speaker, over $200 million to add 1,000 spaces, Mr. Speaker, to the entire province of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, we make available those loans and those grants to commercial and non-profit child care centres, Mr. Speaker, to expand. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, $4.4 million for expansion funding was just recently awarded, Mr. Speaker, as well. Repair and renovation to the tune of $1 million, Mr. Speaker. And again, we know there are challenges in different areas of the province. We make those dollars available, and it is entirely up to the sector, Mr. Speaker, to come forward and present to us projects, Mr. Speaker, that we can support. We will continue to support those projects from one end of the province, many of which happen right here in the central district, Mr. Speaker. So again, $200 million investment on behalf of this side of the House, Mr. Speaker. We absolutely do believe in choice, quality childcare for all families here in Nova Scotia.
The Honourable the member for Halifax Atlantic on her final supplementary.
1,000 spaces across the province. Mr. Speaker, it actually gets worse. There are families and communities in this province who can't even get their children to the places where the childcare is. No public transit, for instance, in Spryfield. So you get a child who cannot reach licensed childcare. That portable subsidy is completely and utterly worthless when the child can't get to the childcare. My question to the minister is, when will that federal funding, which was allocated to childcare subsidies, stop being hoarded and used to put licensed quality childcare actually where it's needed?
The Honourable the Minister of Community Services.
So, Mr. Speaker, again, I would stand, Mr. Speaker, and reference the investment of this side of the House, Mr. Speaker, the $3 million public transit, Mr. Speaker, announcement last week in the budget, which the NDP voted against, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the increase in repair and renovation, the expansion loans and grants, Mr. Speaker, that this side of the House put in place, Mr. Speaker, to provide quality childcare for all Nova Scotians, Mr. Speaker, something that we take very seriously on this side of the House. Mr. Speaker, we take it very seriously. We will continue to invest quality childcare for this province, Mr. Speaker, despite what the NDP would have us do, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the member for Cape Breton South.
My question, Mr. Speaker, is the Minister of Economic Development. Over the past few months, we have seen several reports of the struggles being faced by the Port of Halifax. Container traffic has seen a large decline, and customers are beginning to leave or are threatening to do so. Caterpillar still has yet to confirm that they will bring back their business to Nova Scotia for the long term. My question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, what steps are you going to take to help bring back customers such as Caterpillar back to the Port of Halifax?
The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable member for the question. Mr. Speaker, we have been working very closely with the Port of Halifax and, of course, with our federal counterparts in the Gateway Initiative. And there are three
Order, please. Order. We're having difficulty hearing the minister. The Honourable the Minister of Economic Development has the floor.
Must be my cold, Mr. Speaker.
Must be.
We are working very closely with the Port of Halifax, and Mr. Speaker, we have three very important initiatives that we want to get underway, and we're persuading the federal government to join us in a program of, first of all, of training to make the Port of Halifax one of the most efficient ports in the Atlantic seaboard. We want to do research to ensure that we are able to get out and contact the decision makers in the industry, Mr. Speaker, and we also want to do the marketing which would flow from that research in order to ensure that as the post-Panamax ships start plying the waters of the North Atlantic, that Nova Scotia is the first port of call for those ships as they come to the North Atlantic and the Atlantic seaboard of North America.
The Honourable the member for Cape Breton South.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Caterpillar has yet to confirm a long-term contract for the terminal, and Maersk has recently announced a short-term line connected to the crabfish season, but they stopped calling their sustained long-term line to our port back in early 2007.
Order, please. The time allotted for oral question period has expired. The Honourable the Opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you call Bill number 139, Autism Working Group Act?
Bill number 139. The Honourable the member for Cole Harbour, Eastern Passage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the opportunity today to rise and speak in support of the bill that I introduced earlier in this session, Bill 139, an act to establish the Autism Working Group. I'm pleased to be able to rise and speak today on behalf of the NDP caucus and certainly the Nova Scotia families that are challenged every day by this disorder. Simply put, Mr. Speaker, this is a bill that will begin the necessary steps to help families facing these challenges, the challenges of autism or autism spectrum disorder. The bill is to form a working group, Mr. Speaker, of stakeholders, government officials, various provincial departments, advocate organizations, and importantly, parents. As expressed to me by parents of residents of Eastern Passage and Cole Harbour riding, the goals for them would be that this government, through the working group, determine the true scope of the issues that are facing these families through evidence-based decisions around this issue. The goal, again, would be to compare supports and programs and services in other provinces, and thus to make recommendations for supports, intervention, and to address the needs through the entire lifespan of the people in Nova Scotia who are affected by this disorder. This isn't a new idea, Mr. Speaker. There was an all-party resolution that came through the Standing Committee for Community Services, but there's been a failure by the minister to endorse this recommendation to date. It's not a difficult thing to understand. It's fairly plain and simple to understand. These families are in need of help. They face challenges, Mr. Speaker, that we often as parents take for granted in our everyday lives. The list is lengthy, but something as simple as communicating with our child, feeding our child, watching our child play with friends, going to the movies, Mr. Speaker, balancing the needs of the entire family, the needs of a child with autism, and balancing the needs of the rest of the family. The list goes on. And these supports, they're needed. They need to be given to these families to help these families have the quality of life that all Nova Scotians deserve, Mr. Speaker. But to provide these supports, the most important factor is to understand the full scope of what our families are facing. Mr. Speaker, autism is the most common neurological disorder affecting children. This disorder changes the way the brain processes information, and it affects all aspects of that person's development. Their impairments include social interaction and relationship and behavior. Sometimes persons with autism may appear aloof or indifferent. They may be unable to have a conversation. To the person that might be witnessing or watching a conversation or an interaction between a child and a parent, they may be looked at as out of sync. They're not connected. Social communication is impaired. Verbal and nonverbal communication. There would be a recognition that they're not really understanding potentially just things we take for granted in facial gestures, facial expressions, and tone of voice. There are impairments around, again, what we take for granted every day in our lives. A resistance to a change in a schedule can throw a family completely off day after day after day. Where a family has a child with autism that needs a consistent routine every day, the schedule can't change, to a family or to the other members of the family that I don't know about you, but my family changes every day, our schedules. It's challenging. It's challenging. And so these families have the extra burden of facing the need of that very, very rigid schedule. Sensitivity to sounds, Mr. Speaker, that's another example of impairment. The unbelievable effects on a high-pitched sound, a loud noise, a sudden loud noise, or even just as simple of going to a movie and having the surround sound that you or I every day, we enjoy. We want to go. We want to hear that surround sound. We want to be at the movies with our family and with our children. And of course, we want all of our children to be able to go to those Disney movies and to have the popcorn that they want to enjoy in that environment as a family. A child with autism or a person with autism at whatever age can have severe difficulty in dealing with that. Those are kinds of things that they're facing, Mr. Speaker. It's estimated, and again I stress estimated, because we don't have the detail, we don't have the actual facts in Nova Scotia. It's estimated, it's been said before, 1 in 150 people have autism spectrum disorder, but we don't really know for sure. And those are just the people that actually are living every day with that spectrum disorder. That doesn't include the parents, whether it be one or two, or the grandparents that are affected and trying to help cope with the results of this disorder. It doesn't include the family and friends that are trying to help and support the effects. The teachers, and again, that list goes on and on. They're all affected in so many different ways, Mr. Speaker, and it's time that we helped these families do the best they can to help provide their child through a lifetime of this disorder. It's not going away. Currently, Mr. Speaker, we can acknowledge the great and positive outcomes of the current EIBI program in Nova Scotia. It's been acknowledged through several opportunities here today that this program is effective. It is working. But it's important that we acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, that that is only to age 5. This disorder is lifelong. We need programs, we need support, we need intervention for lifespan of these people. And they're beautiful, strong people that can contribute to society, but they need the extra help. There's only 27 people in our province, Mr. Speaker, out of a potential 5,000 to 6,000 that can receive that EIBI program. That's shameful. It's been suggested to me that people don't necessarily like the term, the EIBI program is a lottery. But Mr. Speaker, I'm going to call a spade a spade. When you have a program that potentially to a family who will actually get the call and say, your child, your family has been drawn out of that random draw, and you now get that program, that's a pot of gold to that family. It's a pot of gold. They've won. Frankly, that's a lottery. The families that are in need, they are relying on intervention and opportunities for all ages across their lifespan. I can't say that enough, and I believe that's what this bill will provide. The families are relying on each other. They're relying on asking and helping their family and friends, their teachers. Thank goodness we have the support of our local organizations from Cape Breton, Autism Nova Scotia, the Valley. We have support groups, I know, in HRM. I had the pleasure of working to help develop a support group in the Dartmouth area. Today's event is significant. It's a significant step, and I thank everyone from all parties, all levels, everyone contributed to that awareness today. I want to take the time to make a special note to Ron Sherrard, an NDP caucus staff person who really played a lead role in that. I'm proud to have been able to come in this chamber today and introduce a friend of mine, Vicki Harvey, who's on her way somewhere in Nova Scotia doing the job that she does so well, the Executive Director of Autism Nova Scotia. I'm proud to be able to say that my experience with her in my life and my family's life has blessed my family. Vicky's son, Conlon, I just got off the phone with him. He changed our life for the better. My son, Tyler, is one of his very best friends since grade primary. Conlon is blessed to have Vicky and Daryl, Conlon's dad, and Conlon's brother Brendan in his life, because they've been able to advocate and move this issue along and help him develop and blossom to the best of his ability. He's now in grade 10, but every family should have these opportunities, but not every family have the background or the skills or the strength and resolve to move that along without support. Knowing Conlon, Mr. Speaker, has given me and my family, certainly, but me, as an MLA representing Cole Harbour and Eastern Passage, insight into this issue. And that's why I pushed and brought this forward with the support of the NDP caucus and my colleagues to move this bill forward, Mr. Speaker. This government needs to have the same insight. I'm not convinced that they do. Through this working group, as a result of this bill, I believe they can do that. I believe that they can get a full scope with the evidence they need to come up with complete and resourceful and good opportunities and support for our families facing this. I've had the chance to help Vicki and residents of Eastern Passage and Cole Harbour create a Dartmouth support group. And what that does, Mr. Speaker, is that provides our families who are facing this every day, the mums, the dads, the grandparents, to come together and talk about the things that they're facing. They provide support for each other. Two particular stories that I had during our first meeting stand out to me and are examples of the kind of insight you need. Something you and I would take for granted with our child is the loss of a tooth at age probably 5. They lose their first tooth. It's a rite of passage for most parents. It's something, oh wow, they've lost their first tooth. Well, I heard a heartbreaking story in that support group of how that loss of a tooth was completely a profound experience for a little boy with autism. And it became something very challenging and stressful and difficult for them because they weren't sure how to cope with it. I also had a person that came in and frankly, this support group offered her a chance, Mr. Speaker, and it's very difficult to articulate these experiences, but to cry over the emotion that she experiences with this new child who's going to school and doesn't understand why they're missing out on opportunities with friends. And these parents come together and they tell each other about this so that they can get the support they need. But they need more. They need this bill to move forward. They need this working group to start only to begin to fill in the gap. And in closing, Mr. Speaker, I look forward to the minister's remarks. I look forward to signs of support for this bill so we can finally start to help these families in a larger way. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I will be sharing some of my time with the Minister of Education as there are a number of programs that fit under both our responsibilities. Very pleased to have the opportunity to rise and talk about what our government is doing to support children with autism and, of course, their families. In December 2004, the Department of Health introduced a $4 million treatment program for young children, not yet in school, diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder. One move that I relish, one that I was very happy that our government was able to do, as all members of this House have constituents that have children with autism. You know, Mr. Speaker, I know of one family who have two. You know the responsibility and the difficulty that it is in raising one child with autism. Can you imagine trying to do it with two? And that is not uncommon as well. That does happen in many areas. Now, Mr. Speaker, to speak of the program specifically, we've received some very positive interim results for this program, which is now up and running in 8 DHAs and at the IWK Health Center. Now, I know through the questioning that I had during question period, and I talked about some of the numbers there, and Mr. Speaker, I'd be the first one to agree that we should be doing more. But Mr. Speaker, we also have to be providing services for other children with other challenges, children with muscular dystrophy, children with Down syndrome, children who have every right to succeed in our province as anyone else does. So, Mr. Speaker, we have to have our numbers, and can we do more? Absolutely. To date, 116 children have completed or are currently involved in the program. There are 75 children still eligible for this program. So, Mr. Speaker, basically keeps a queue of people lined up that when space becomes available, that the person can be randomly picked out of those 75 to go into our program. Mr. Speaker, the early intensive behavioral intervention program is not only helping children speak and understand language, but it's also helping to improve problem-solving skills and is reducing behavioral problems. Now, some of the parents that were surveyed also indicated that improved behavior and reduced symptoms had allowed the family to participate more fully in community activities with their children. The member also mentioned, something very simple that I would take for granted with my children, as we do go see a lot of movies at the Yarmouth Theatre. All the things going on. I can only imagine when you have trouble comprehending all the things that are going on, what the difficulty you would have with your child there. But we do take some of those things for granted. But what we are seeing with this program is it is allowing these families to partake in some of these things, where there is a lot of noise going on, when there is a lot of commotion, which we know that these children do have trouble coping with. Mr. Speaker, we are pleased to see that this program is truly making a difference in the lives of children and families with autism. And as the program continues to expand, we expect it to improve the future for many more young children. Now, there are currently other initiatives underway in the Department of Education and Community Services, including enhanced supports for children and youth in the school system. I know the member or the Minister of Education will speak more in depth at those ones. The Mental Health and Children's Services and Addiction Treatment Branch of the Department of Health has several working groups currently in place. And this is more speaking specifically to the bill that's before us on setting up a working group. Now, these include, the current working groups include a working group with community services and education, a families group, there's an advisory team, as well as the EIBI implementation management team. Mr. Speaker, there are a lot of people who are interested in the well-being of these children. Mr. Speaker, I just don't want to see another level of bureaucracy created and dollars go to support that kind of bureaucracy when, in my mind, the dollars should be going to the children. So that's where, maybe our differences fall, where our disagreement maybe on this bill will come from. That we don't believe that necessarily a working group will solve some of these issues. There are a lot of people that are involved today looking forward to the well-being of these children. At a recent meeting of the families group, it was suggested that representatives from Education and Community Services be invited to attend one of their meetings to give an update on what their departments is doing. Mr. Speaker, I know that staff are looking into having this meeting in September to look at those issues, look at where we are, look at where those gaps are. Mr. Speaker, evidence has suggested that early intervention, and we talked about this many times, it has the most positive and significant impact on improving the lives of these children and their families. Now, in the past 6 years, we've invested $6 million to develop and implement services for young children diagnosed with autistic spectrum disorder. Now, we'll continue to support and invest in these programs and services such as these, and indeed in the areas of mental health. So, Mr. Speaker, as I close up and maybe share my time in a couple seconds, I'll share one quick anecdote. My wife, who is in her practice teacher, her practicum, becoming a teacher, is in her first practicum, and in the class, she's very happy to talk about her class and what she's learning there. There are 2 children within that class that have autism, and Mr. Speaker, one functions very well without the aid of an aid worker. The other one, of course, needs some help. And Mr. Speaker, it was neat. I think what she saw was the interaction of the other students that are in this class. That when the autistic child succeeded with something, and in a way disrupted the class a little bit because he was so happy to have actually done it, and he cheers and says, "Oh, I did it," and the whole class stands up and claps, and sort of tells him to reinforce him that he is doing the right thing. He is really contributing to the class. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I will take my seat and share my time with the Minister of Education.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am pleased to rise today and to speak to this piece of legislation. And of course, members will recall recent question period today about the importance of the school system in particular being able to respond to and address the the range of disorders that present themselves in the classroom. And our government is committed to working with community agencies to create programs and services that address the challenges of all people with special needs. And to that end, we have instituted a range of options and services that help our students achieve success regardless of any challenge they face, Mr. Speaker. Included in these efforts are students with autism spectrum disorders. And we have a series of initiatives in place at the department. For example, each board in the province has a demonstration and training sites to help our teachers learn more about the disorder and effective strategies and techniques to support the students in their classroom who have that disability. These strategy for teaching based on autism research sites, or STAR sites, provide a wealth of knowledge to our teachers. And as I said in question period today, we recognize that many of our teachers do not understand the disorder, and we want to make sure that not only do they understand the disorder, but they also have strategies that are appropriate that they can use. These training programs help educators ensure success for their students, Mr. Speaker, their students with autism spectrum disorders. We have implemented an autism professional development initiative, and to date we have in-serviced over 150 of our classroom teachers and our resource teachers, teachers who will be able to deal effectively with these students on a daily basis. We have also, as we've heard in the House many times, responded positively with our tuition support program. And that program, of course, is not specific to autism, but it is to students who have disabilities. And we consult, Mr. Speaker, with the families, with the experts, and with other departments such as Community Services and Health. We have a Provincial Education Autism Advisory Team, and we do have members of the Autism Society of Nova Scotia represented on that committee. We do want to hear from those people who are close to the families and close to the concerns, so we want them represented, and they are represented on those particular committees. These two panels advise the Department of Education and help us and our partners move in the right direction to support students with autism. And they provide a forum for the review and the monitoring of our programs, as well as other government initiatives. The committee meets regularly, and we will continue to work with the Department of Health. We know that early detection and early intervention is important, and we know that by changing our age of entry date, we're capturing students at an earlier age in our schools, and we'll be able to follow up with the supports that are needed there. So in review, if I could, Mr. Speaker, we have targeted funding. We're in the third year of a 4-year initiative. We have 8 lead teams in our schools. We have developed an autism strategy. We have hired an autism consultant. We have included the Autism Society of Nova Scotia representatives. We have 11 demonstration sites, and we will continue, Mr. Speaker, to put our efforts together with those of the Department of Health to make sure that we fully identify and serve and support those students and those families who have need. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Kingswith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and very pleased today to rise on the NDP bill brought before the House, which was on April 28th, and just a few days later, on May 2nd, the Liberal caucus also put a bill before the House. Probably, I think, in essence, a very similar one. Our bill focused on 3 areas: enhance early identification of autism in students, enhance public awareness respecting autism, and increase cooperation between departments in the public service respecting autism students. It's been 5 years now since, or almost 5 years, since I asked the first question about autism in the House. It was one of the early issues that the member from Annapolis and the member from Citadel and myself brought here to the legislature. At that time, I guess the member for Annapolis and I had a unique situation in that in our part of the province, Annapolis East Elementary School was one of the first schools, in fact, in Atlantic Canada, that developed a program. A lady by the name of Kim Hume was the developer of that program, a very successful program, so much so that the word several Air Force children or children of Air Force parents sent their children to that school. The word got around, and before long we had servicemen from other parts of the country asking for transfers into the Greenwood base. And at one point, this is now about 10 years ago, they had 16 children in a program, each one with an EA. So that program was the beginning in our area of a great awareness of autism. But I guess it was during my first campaign that autism really impacted on me as I went to 2 homes almost in succession, where in one home there were 2 children with autism, and in the second home another child with very, very profound autism spectrum disorder. And of course the spectrum can range from a rating of 1 to 12, and this child probably was 11 or a 12 in the rating. So and it wasn't too much, probably it was the next year that a man by the name of Norm Donovan, and I want to give Norm a lot of credit, not only with VAST, but provincially, came to committee in 2004 and presented on behalf of autistic parents and children to the committee the absolute need to do something in support of autism. And so all 9 members of the committee on that particular day, after a motion was made to make it a line item in the budget. And it was one of the most, I guess, memorable parts of committee life, that we were able to take from committee and put into the budget a $4 million support to autism in the province. So this bill, introduced by the NDP, and very similar one that we've introduced as well around a working committee, I believe is a next good piece that all members of the legislature should be supporting. And while the Minister of Health has some concerns around it, I think it, again, like the Working Committee on Chronic Pain, really brought to the attention of this House and to Nova Scotia the need for a pan-provincial input. And that's what this working group can do. I think it can cross the borders of community service, of health, of education, and give us a great insight as to what's going on, but more importantly, what are the gaps in delivering some help to persons of autism right across the life cycle. And that's what we must, realize here. While there's a great focus on EIBI and intensive therapy, and so it should be, because the greatest changes can be made, as we know, in those early years. But one of the things about autism, since first being talked about 60 years ago by the American psychiatrist Leo Kanner, is that we now know that autism is almost like cancer. It's many diseases with many distinct causes. As well known, there's a wide range in the severity of symptoms, from profound disability to milder forms like Asperger syndrome. which is intellectual ability is generally high, but social awareness is low. So it manifests itself in many different ways. But even though we've worked to get this $4 million budget item, as the member opposite who introduced the bill has said, is that it's still only a small number of those that need the therapy that are actually being treated. I think to have a lottery system to choose what children will be supported is indeed something that the province must look very long and hard at very quickly. So, so I'm hoping that that's one of the things, again, that a working group can be strong advocates for, continue to demand that we would get the kind of help. Also, I think they'd be working on programs like a 3-year-old testing program, whereby at 3 years old, every child in Nova Scotia has basic tests around speech, hearing, all of those areas of behavior that by 3 we can get a good idea if a child has some part of the autism spectrum that they fit. So I think it's areas like that we need to give greater support to. The Minister of Education, in responding to the question today, talked about a 4-year strategy that the Department of Education has in place. And again, it's a very valuable asset in dealing with children who have autism, and it's now in its 3rd year. And the STAR program has, again, made a huge impact. But we still need a lot of training in our school system. We need a lot of EA type of support to these children in an ongoing way. So I think there's a whole number of areas. When you take a look at right here in HRSB, in a recent meeting with the superintendent of HRSB and the school board, they have identified 50 children that will be coming into HRSB school system this year who fit somewhere on the spectrum of autism, and so that's a tremendous challenge to the school system to deal with. So I think this is where a working group can be using professionals, parents, volunteers to assist with these children. So just to move through that a little bit again, I think the areas of identification. We talk about the statistics showing there could be about 5,000 to 6,000 from the 2-year-old, because although it's interesting now that they're actually looking at the potential as early as 9 months old to see some of the first possibilities that a child may have autism. This was, in fact, a Globe and Mail article on May the 16th. I seem to have misplaced my copy here, but again, it's one of those areas where tremendous amounts of research are changing things here very quickly. But I think some of that early identification, the gaps provincially. One of the areas that I've heard from a number of parents about is the fact that many family doctors have had no professional development in identification of autism. And again, it's a case now where each year they must put in so many hours of professional development, and to have doctors again get the professional development for early identification, I think is pretty essential. We all know, as I referenced just even HRSB, of the school needs that we do have, and many adults in the life cycle. One of the articles that I've come across recently was Time magazine. It was the May 7th edition, And it was the story, of course, of Hannah, and there's a great paragraph here, and I'd like to read it into the record. The road to Hannah's mind opened a few days before her 13th birthday. Her parents, therapists, nutritionists, and teachers had spent years preparing the way. They had moved mountains to improve her sense of balance, her sensory perception, and her overall health. They sent in truckloads of occupational and physical therapy and emotional support. Hannah, and anyway, nothing was working. She had no vocab whatsoever, and Hannah proved them wrong. She was set up with a computer, keyboard, and she was asked, "Is there anything you'd like to say, Hannah?" And Marilyn Chadwick, Director of Training at the Facilitated Communication Institute at Syracuse University, couldn't believe when she wrote into the computer, "I love Mom." So you can imagine what happened to that family. And today, just a year and a half later, she is actually studying high school biology, algebra, and ancient history. So we have much to learn, and I believe a working group in this province would be a wonderful assist to all of the departments to give greater importance to autism and how supporting them in the early years of life and throughout the life cycle can make profound changes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I take my place not just as the critic for community services, but also a member of the Standing Committee on Community Services, who some time ago had the opportunity to hear from some of the voices and organizations from around the province that are trying to bring to light some of the situations that families find themselves in dealing with autism. Now, one of the resolutions that came out of that committee, Mr. Speaker, was the fact that we did want to push for the very bill that is forward in the House today that we present. The one point I want to make so that all members understand, as I know we do, but people out there that might be watching, people in the gallery today, Mr. Speaker, is that this is an all-party committee. And there are members on that committee that happen to be at the cabinet table, strong voices at the cabinet table. And the resolution that was passed pushing for this working group was supported by all members. And that there is an important point to impress upon the Minister of Health. When the importance of this, that day when organizations from around the province came in, they came in also, Mr. Speaker, to tell us some of the stories that some of the families had faced. And this is what the premise of this whole bill is about. It's not just about all the benefits that the EIBI has helped some families, Mr. Speaker, so far, a small number. The minister today spoke about 75 families now. But we know that coming out of that meeting, there's many, many more parents across this province and children across this province that are struggling with this disorder. So we hope that this is an opportunity to present an education piece. And we've seen the success. In 2006, the current government started talking about breaking down silos and the importance of different departments communicating. Well, here's another example where a working group can assist in those situations and help the government get a real understanding of how families and children are dealing with this, and not just at the early ages. And we know the benefits, Mr. Speaker, of early intervention. We've seen it. The issue that came out of the Standing Committee as well, however, in some of the lines of questioning, was we don't have any concrete figures in Canada. And I think that here, again, is an opportunity for a working group to come together, to reach out with the departments in the government, but also other families, to make other families feel comfortable enough to come forward to say, there are people in government that are understanding, there are other families that can relate to us. This is an opportunity to have their stories told, their experiences, not just at birth or in their early years, as the EIBI program extends to only the age of 6. There's many things that happen, Mr. Speaker, in families' lives after that time. When the child goes through high school. One of the saddest stories I had to hear during that committee meeting, Mr. Speaker, was to have a mother tell me that she didn't want to have to tell her 18-year-old son that he couldn't go on to university, and he wanted to be an engineer. But there's no safeguards or provisions, and we heard the Minister of Education speak about some of the programs, and we do recognize that there is some implementations in the school boards to try to address autism. But what happens after? What happens when a child with autism spectrum disorder wants to go on to community college or university? Are they going to have those supports there? And these are some of the stories that we have as legislators an opportunity to listen to if we're able to put forward a working group. Now, I raised a question about the EIBI program, and in 2005, yes, it was very momentous to have a portion of the budget dedicated to this program, a $4 million budget. And that's fantastic, Mr. Speaker, but it went very, very, it was limited to how many families. And as was mentioned here in the debate, it was a lottery shot for some of the families. And I've been very fortunate to have one family in my community of Dartmouth North benefit from that program. And absolutely, a single mother raising a young child with autism, a single mother period has a difficulty, but having an autistic child and having that opportunity to participate in this program was tremendous, Mr. Speaker, and she benefited. However, we haven't seen that budget increase. We haven't seen that $4 million go to $5 million. We haven't seen, and the minister talked about the extending of the program to potentially 75 people today. It's still not enough, Mr. Speaker, and this working group, if we can get this bill passed in this House and we can provide the opportunities for parents to form a working group with any stripe of government that sits on that side of the House, I believe that it would give Nova Scotians an opportunity and a voice at the national level. And really, I don't expect the government of Nova Scotia, any government in Nova Scotia, to carry the burden, because this is an epidemic right now. And as was mentioned again in question period, 1 in 150 children are being diagnosed with some form of autism spectrum disorder, Mr. Speaker. So we recognize across Canada that it's an issue. But what has to happen is collectively we have to come together. And what better way to do it than to hear from the families that have been affected by this disorder, to hear from the children that have been affected by disorder. But that means a commitment by governments. And not just this government, but the government that may come after it and after that one. It's about implementing it and improving upon it. And we have a real opportunity here because autism spectrum disorder is in the limelight, Mr. Speaker. We have people's attention, but what we don't have is the education piece, we don't have the statistics, and we don't have the full understanding of what families are really dealing with. And that's important that we allow them a mechanism, a process that can bring their stories to the host of this legislature, Mr. Speaker. Now, I know the Minister of Community Services over the past week has talked about the continuum of care provided for persons with disabilities. And I will concur to her that, yes, her department does allow families to have those supports. And this was another thing that came out of that committee meeting, Mr. Speaker, was the fact that some of these families, and this is one of the stories that we don't hear, unfortunately, but with a working group we would hear, Mr. Speaker. Some of these families don't have the opportunity to enjoy their lives. Some of the families, they lose their marriages over struggling financially. They don't have that relationship because so much attention is being put on the child. Those are sad stories that really don't have to take place if we have that support and understanding as governments to support these families. And one of the things that came out of it was the fact that some of these families need respite care. But unfortunately, we aren't able to accommodate all cases. And that's sad, Mr. Speaker, because it puts more stress and undue stress on those families. In closing, Mr. Speaker, what I'd like to talk about is that we really do recognize now. I know there's a working group that's formed, an ASDRT, Autism Spectrum Disorder Research Team across this country. But what greater way than to have a Nova Scotia working group, allow them to have the understanding and education to what families in Nova Scotia are struggling with. We can provide them with that information, Mr. Speaker. When I think about any piece of legislation that's brought forward from the House, the opportunity to sit with those, to listen to those stories of people's lives who that piece of legislation is going to affect. That's the important key that we have. That's the role that we have as legislators, Mr. Speaker. We we have to become educated to the process and have a full understanding before we actually stand here and vote on a piece of legislation. And today, I think this is an important bill that the member from Eastern Passage, who I know has a great passion for the subject of autism. I know the all-party member of community services. We've again have heard those stories from families across the province. And you know, to stand in my place today and say I don't understand is the truth. Because I haven't had to deal with the pressures of raising a child, the financial pressures, the relationship pressures that dealing with some of the situations that these families go through, Mr. Speaker. And I think the onus is on government to bring something forward like this. And this is a start. This is a piece of the puzzle that we can allow these families to have confidence that their legislators are paying attention, that their legislators actually want to see their families benefit, because it is about the lifespan. Because family members get older, husband and wives get older, grandmothers and grandfathers get older, but eventually that child will move on in life, or the family will pass on, and that child is going to be left out there. And if we don't start listening to some of these families with some of the situations they're dealing with, and again, early intervention is very important, Mr. Speaker, but it is the lifespan that we have an opportunity with this working group to hear from. Because there are children out there today that they're living with this disorder, but we haven't discovered it yet. We haven't had to deal with them. We've labeled them in the past as having some other form or disability, but we know now from stats and figures coming out of the U.S., and we know that we're working on it across Canada, but there is no greater process that we can put in place right now, in my opinion, and the opinion of the NDP, than to have a working group that would instill in the parents that are dealing with this disorder the confidence that their government is listening and that their government will take those stories to Ottawa so that Ottawa can fund this. Because again, we can't fund this as a whole, as a government, because it is an epidemic. We need the help of the federal government, and that's crucial. But they're not going to listen to somebody in Cape Breton or somebody in Yarmouth who has a child. They will listen to a government that's ready to stand up for families in this province, Mr. Speaker, and there's no better way to do it than with a working group for autism spectrum disorder. Thank you.
Thank you. The time allotted for debate on Bill 139 has now expired. The chair now recognizes the official opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, could you call Bill number 62, the Government Purchases Act?
Bill number 62, Government Purchases Act. Chair recognizes the honourable member from Pictou-East.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a great pleasure for me to stand in this House in support of Bill 62, not just because it is my private member's bill, but because it sends a real message to government departments and agencies. It's an important bill, Mr. Speaker. The whole thrust of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is that goods purchased by the provincial government will be produced in accordance with minimum fair labor practices prescribed by regulation. Now, Mr. Speaker, this bill could also be called the anti-sweatshop legislation. And the thrust of this bill is to have government departments and agencies look at the purchases that they are about to make and to ensure that fair labor has been involved in the process. And more importantly, to also look at a product to see if it has been in fact made in Nova Scotia, to see if it has been made in Canada. Because we, Mr. Speaker, are constantly purchasing items that are made in China, that are made in Bangladesh, that are made in India. And we realize that there is a global economy, but we also have to realize that we have to look at industries here within our own province and within our own country. And we shouldn't all be rushing to the bottom. We should be trying to help to raise some of these countries up rather than engaging in activity that will, in fact, help to, in some ways, diminish the labor of Nova Scotians and others. You know, Mr. Speaker, if Dickens were around today and could write about some of the sweatshops that exist in countries like China and like Bangladesh, and in some cases India as well, where we are becoming aware that we're not just dealing with sweatshops, we are dealing with child labor situations. We are dealing with situations where children sometimes are actually sold for the equivalent of a few dollars and are working at 10 and 11 and 12 years old in conditions that you just could not imagine. Now, this strikes home to me, Mr. Speaker, because a lot of my forefathers started to work in the pit when they were 13 and 14 years old. And I always remember a situation where my grandmother used to tell me about her brother who she loved and admired and respected. And she was coming home from school as a little girl, and she saw the neighbor women going to her home, and she was wondering why everyone was heading for that house. And when she got home, she found out that her 14-year-old brother had been killed in the pit. Now, those are situations that we have moved so far away from in Nova Scotia. There has been so many progressive things that have happened in this province. But why do we need this legislation? Well, just two examples. Very recently, we have had T-shirts made on behalf of Nova Scotia that were, in fact, made in Haiti, made in a country that has had Papa Doc and Baby Doc and all kinds of other docs who have known absolutely nothing about democracy and fair trade and fair wages and fair labor. You know, Mr. Speaker, when we look at the garment industry, I think it's important that we look at Stanfields, for example, or even Wearwell Garments, which is a stone's throw away from my riding. When we look at the Stanfield Company, capable of making just about anything, and the history of that company, when Charles Stanfield came to America in 1855, he didn't realize that he was going to be one of the leaders in the field of the garment industry. You know, it was in 1870 that Charles founded the Truro Woolen Mills. Way back in 1870, the company is still existing there today. Through that family, has produced one of our outstanding premiers in this province. It's a company that has contributed so much to the economy of the province of Nova Scotia. You know, we look at that garment industry, and we don't often think that the first cardigan jackets ever produced anywhere in the world were produced here in Truro, Nova Scotia. The first stockinettes were produced in Truro. The famous drop seat underwear that took people to the Klondike and beyond in the gold rush were produced in Truro. And those drop seat underwear were an invention made developed in a shed in Charles's backyard, I believe. Anyhow, the situation And the question has been raised. I do, in fact, wear Stanfields, and proud to say so.
Too much information.
Thank you. Thank you. I could table them tomorrow. So, Mr. Speaker, we need this kind of legislation to make us all look at what we are purchasing. We recently had a very embarrassing situation here with the Department of Labor in this province, having safety little squeeze helmets, which I could table one perhaps right now. But they were actually made in China when we have a company here in Nova Scotia that was very capable of making those trinkets, and perhaps at
Order, please. The chair recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Environment.
Point of order. The company in the
Point of
Chronicle
order.
Herald stated that they couldn't make that product.
That is certainly not a point of order. I will not entertain this disagreement between the Honourable two members. The chair recognizes the Honourable member from Pick 2.
Mr. Speaker, they could have made something equivalent or something that could have been recognized as a safety promotional tool in this province. And there are companies throughout this country that are capable of doing that kind of thing. So we have to look at more than price when we are doing the purchasing within this province, Mr. Speaker. We have to look beyond price. Now, Mr. Speaker, I'm not exactly sure of how much time that I have here, but I want to move beyond the garment industry. I believe that I have about 5 minutes, but I want to look beyond the garment industry. And I want to look at...
Order, please. The honourable member's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the Honourable the Minister of Economic Development.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the bill that is before us is indeed very interesting. Mr. Speaker, I hope in the few moments that I have to contribute to the debate this afternoon that members will see that the intent of this bill is in fact in the process of being fulfilled by the actions of our procurement policy and the steps that we're taking to implement our procurement policy in the province of Nova Scotia. And Mr. Speaker, I hope to be able to share some of my time with the Minister of Labour. And Mr. Speaker, we go to the fundamental principles under which this government approaches issues such as purchasing, we would begin by looking at the Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity Act, which sets out more than 20 goals to make the province one of the cleanest and most sustainable environments in the world by the year 2020. And one of these goals is a sustainable procurement policy by 2009. A working group with representatives from economic development, environment, and transportation and infrastructure renewal has been formed to guide the development of this policy. The stakeholder outreach is already underway and a public consultation will start this summer, Mr. Speaker. It is expected the policy will be finalized and put into practice early in 2009. Nova Scotia's economic growth strategy, opportunities for sustainable prosperity, and its social strategy, weaving the threads, a lasting social fabric, discuss how economic prosperity, the social prosperity, and environmental sustainability weave together to support the sustainable prosperity of Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, Procurement Services is leading the evolution of sustainable procurement for provincial government departments. Once complete, the new policy will provide a framework for adoption by school boards and health authorities. This updated policy will coordinate and support existing efforts and provide direction for making sustainable procurement the standard for all provincial procurement. Sustainable procurement is not just about the environment or the economy. It includes social factors such as fair trade, fair labor practices, minority issues, and health issues. Currently, Mr. Speaker, Manitoba, the only NDP government in this province, is the only Canadian province to adopt a no-sweat policy. But it has its shortcomings, Mr. Speaker. It covers clothing and apparel purchased by government departments, but the policy does not cover the so-called MASH sector: municipalities, academic institutions, school boards, hospitals, health authorities, and crown corporations, where most of the purchasing is made. So here in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker, our procurement practices with its associated terms and conditions give the province the right to terminate contracts with unethical companies. And if procurement services became aware of an unethical practice, including unfair labor practices, it would take the necessary steps to disqualify that company from the tendering process. This government recognizes that the important role public procurement can play in contributing to the sustainable prosperity of the province. In 06-07, the province purchased more than $800 million in goods, services, and construction. By practicing sustainable procurement, this annual consumption becomes a driver for change toward increased innovation, sustainable competitiveness, and the sustainable prosperity of this province. Significant benefits can result to our economy as a result of introducing sustainable criteria in our purchasing decisions. Nova Scotia suppliers who meet our criteria will be more competitive in the worldwide market for sustainable goods and services. The new policy will also maintain our support for innovation and economic development initiatives for Nova Scotia business. So right now, Mr. Speaker, the province's supplier development program encourages Nova Scotia companies to sell to government. It helps small business operators learn how to bid on government tenders and provide outreach services and community workshops on how to access business opportunities with government. These so-called reverse trade shows are held across the province every year, and the connections our small business owners make with public purchasers at the trade shows provide opportunity for growth and market expansion. The benefit to our environment from a sustainable procurement policy will be significant. For example, the government's stationary stockroom purchases about 360 metric tons of letter-size bond paper each year for printers and copiers. By using paper with just 10% recycled content, the province would each year save 680 trees, over 1 million liters of water, 100 cubic meters of landfill, 164,000 kilowatt hours of power, and nearly 30 metric tons of airborne pollutants. That's just one tiny example of the power of going green. Nova Scotia is the first province in Canada to undertake a comprehensive, sustainable procurement policy. We are taking a leadership approach and setting new standards for our environmental, economic, and social well-being. At the same time, our sustainable procurement policy will retain the primary goals of open, fair, consistent, efficient, and competitive procurement, as well as honoring all interprovincial trade agreements. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to turn the remainder of my time over to my colleague, the Minister of Labour. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable Minister of Labour and Workforce Development.
How much time do I have, Mr. Speaker?
Approximately 2.5 minutes.
2.5 minutes. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add to the words that my honourable colleague said, and whenever he speaks, he always speaks with great wisdom and great insight. And I just wanted to add, in response to the minister, to the member opposite, when he made the comment that what we should do is try and raise some countries up to our standard. And Mr. Speaker, that's exactly what we're trying to do with the bill that I brought forward, that I anticipate the honourable member will support, the North American Labour Cooperative Agreement. It's a beginning sort of step in this process where we enter into labour cooperative agreements, in this case with the other NAFTA countries, but beyond that we may enter into agreements with other countries as well. And what we do in that regard, Mr. Speaker, is that we export, in a sense, our labour standards, our expertise to them in order to help them bring their labour standards up in their country. Now, the reverse is true too. They can increase our labour standards, but we feel confident that we have some of the best labour standards in the world, Mr. Speaker, and if there are ways to improve it, we're open to that. But what we want to do is enter into these agreements. There's about 4 other provinces that have such agreements: Prince Edward Island, Manitoba, Quebec. And it's an attempt to work with other countries to do exactly what the honourable member advised that we do, which is to help raise the labour standards of other countries for better competitiveness of our own companies, but also because it's the right thing to do. Because what we want for our own workers, good labour standards, good safety standards, we want for others as well, Mr. Speaker. And so I take it from the members putting forward this bill that he'll be supporting wholeheartedly the North American Labour Cooperative Agreement. And I know that the critic for the NDP has already signaled their willingness to support this because this is a way of working together. And the process would be, Mr. Speaker, that labour union leaders, and I've talked to several of them, would partner with companies and go over to some part of Mexico, and I suspect, Mr. Speaker, we'll find that they want to schedule those trips for January, February. I may be wrong on that, but they will go over, Mr. Speaker. The important thing is they'll go over and they'll work with their counterparts on some aspect of labour law, labour standards, occupational health and safety standards whatsoever. Yes, if they're interested in sweatshops, they'll go in June, and we'll see the commitment. But, Mr. Speaker, this is a way of raising up labour standards in other countries, exactly what the honourable member is calling for. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been listening very intently to some of the comments by my honourable colleagues, and I tend to agree with them on many of the issues they brought forward. I don't believe in this country we should be buying products from other countries that are produced in sweatshop using children or any other means to produce goods cheaper and be able to flood the market with them. That's basically what's happened in some of these cases. Unfortunately, we can't control what happens in other countries. We can only control what we purchase. And I believe that this act, although I don't totally agree with the act, in all aspects, it does address part of that issue. When you leave the act to go to regulation, then I get very nervous based on other things that have happened here in this legislature with regulation. But when you really get down to the real issue that's involved here, we're talking about purchases made by government and only by government, which is a small but very important part of the economy here in Nova Scotia. And an Honourable Minister of Economic Development indicated that it also should address the MASH sector with the school boards and municipalities and other areas. And I would agree with that, because as we move forward, we have to do these things. But getting to the real issue here in Nova Scotia is we can buy goods almost anywhere in the world cheaper than we can produce them here. And that raises a question: why? It's a very important question, because until we address that issue, as the Minister of Labour indicated, he feels that this new economically sustainable bill that they put in place will fix problems in other countries. Well, I'm afraid I've traveled a lot and dealt with businesses in other countries. We're not going to change anything in another country with our act here in Nova Scotia. We can suggest things, but if people want to change, they will. If they don't want to change, they'll tell us basically to get lost. And that's the fact of business, and that's the way it works. Anyone thinks anything else really hasn't been involved in business in the past. We have many obstacles here in Nova Scotia, very serious obstacles to business, and these are things that we have to address. We have very high labor costs because we have a high standard of living. And the more our standard of living goes up and the more our inflation rate goes up, which I heard today has gone up substantially because of increase in oil products, and which will continue to increase inflation, the first inflation we've seen in years, one that we have no control over. So that's going to become very, very serious to our economy as time moves forward. Then you look at the taxes that we pay. Here in the regional municipality, if you run a business in the regional municipality, you're basically taxed to death. There's no other way to put it. That's simply what happens. And if you run a manufacturing operation and you're competing with someone, even in the U.S., which is one of the easier places to compete with, and then if you go to Mexico, it's impossible to compete with the taxes. It puts you on an unfair playing field immediately. So you have that burden. And I'm speaking from experience because I did export a lot of products that are manufactured here in Nova Scotia. Then the next issue we have is red tape. Every government, including the government I was in, and I was minister responsible for that at one time, committed to reducing red tape. And there's been some movement in that area, not near enough. They talk about this, but then you have government bureaucrats that don't really understand business trying to cut red tape. Now, they have the best intentions and the best kind of people, but if you don't understand what burden it puts on a business, you can't understand how to correct it and still get the information government needs and ensure that the business is non-duly burdened. I can remember one incident that I used to get these from Census Canada on businesses, all this information, this long form I had to fill out every couple of months and ask me if I'm going to expand my business. And at the time it was Brian Mulrooney in power when our economy was in the garbage can, and John Buchanan here in Nova Scotia. So there was no way you're going to invest in any kind of business at that time because interest rates were right through the roof, and there was the economy in Nova Scotia was horrible. So finally, I wrote on one, don't send me anymore. And then they sent me a nasty letter back and said, by law, you have to fill them out. So I kept filling them out. So the last going off, what I did, which was the truth, and I didn't lie in the forms, are you going to invest in Nova Scotia? And the answer was no to every question. No, to every question. So after I did about 3 of those to give them to me. They went to someone else, I guess, to get the information really that they wanted, not really what the truth was. So if you talk about that's a red tape, we have to have low cost of energy in this province. We don't have low cost energy. We've got high cost of energy. And there's been no effort by this government, true effort by this government, to reduce the cost of energy by using renewable energy resources and sources and encourage the development of those sources. And not only the sources, but the manufacturing of those sources and engage and have a double improvement in our economy. So that's an issue that's a problem. We have an infrastructure problem. Transportation infrastructure problem. So if you get your goods, how do you get them to your market? Have you ever tried to get a product to Europe? That's not quite enough to fill up a container, too much to fly, so what do? You've got a big problem on your hands. So you fill a container half full and you pay the full price. So that puts the cost of your products up. There has to be other infrastructure developments in transportation. Our roads are as the government and everyone agrees with, is we've got to put a $4 billion deficit in our transportation system on our roads where we transport most of our goods if we're going to the U.S. or Upper Canada. You know, so that's a deterrent for us. And if you look at another problem that I've been, and I know this from experience, and I know this for a fact, we don't have the proper education system here to train tradespeople. We don't have it. It's been watered down so badly that basically when you get someone, usually unless the person is has a fantastic mechanical aptitude, and there are a number of people that have, but most people have a regular mechanical aptitude, and they take a little bit longer to learn, but fantastic employees when they do learn and given the opportunity. And actually, wonderful people to produce. And I can tell you with the people we have in Nova Scotia, given the right opportunity, the right equipment, and the right training, they can produce as well as anyone in the world. And that's a fact. And if you don't give an individual the tools and the opportunity to do things and learn, they can never achieve that. And it's not their fault. It's a fault of the system for not really working to ensure that that happens. And I think what's happened is over the years, the educators have taken over the industrial trades and not understanding what the trades were and set criteria for these trades and not knowing that at the end of the day, it's nice to know some of these things that they're teaching, and probably all of them, but it's more important to know these practical things that you have to know in industry to make a living and to ensure that you're efficient and work safely in the workplace. So I think that really has to be addressed in the province here. And if we don't address that and address some of these issues, and there's many more obstacles to business, many, many more, we're not going to improve our economy. And if we don't improve our economy, and we don't get Nova Scotians working here, we can't displace these items that we're bringing in from other countries that with a real low labor rate. And some of these countries better trained than we are here. And there's one thing I've got to say about the Minister of Economic Development's talking about using recycled paper and using 10% of it. Well, if we're going to use 10% of the recycled paper that comes out of Nova Scotia, we've got to start collecting it again at the enviro depots. The RFB in their great wisdom decided not to do that, and then in estimates, and I've mentioned this before, when I was talking to the Minister of Environment, he was explaining how wonderful that it was that the Minas Basin Pulp and Paper Mill actually makes all their paper now from recycled paper. However, they're buying the recycled paper because they can't get enough in Nova Scotia now, and I would probably guess it's because the enviro depots don't pick this material up easier, make it easier for people out of the U.S. at a great expense. So that's really not being, efficient to the environment or to the business. If you got to truck all this material in or ship it by ships, you're creating a ton of greenhouse gases just to get the raw material here when we have it here in Nova Scotia and not using it. So if we're going to make things work properly in this province, we've really got to rethink how we do business in the province, how we train our people, and how we make everything integrate together to move forward. And we've got to do that. And I think as politicians, we owe it to the people of this province to make sure that is the case. But I don't see the movement in this province by this government to make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the honourable member from Halifax Needham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to have an opportunity to speak briefly to this bill regarding government purchases and procurement. I've listened with interest to the debate. I agree with many things that the previous speaker said in the Liberal caucus, but I would say to him that I think we need to be more hopeful that, in fact, we can affect change in other countries. And I say that thinking of the example of the ending of apartheid in South Africa, Mr. Speaker, which was the result, we must remember, of a worldwide boycott of companies that invested in South Africa. That boycott was organized and led by the International Trade Union Movement, or the International Labor Movement, and the result of that was, in fact, a withdrawal of investment throughout parts of South Africa, and a coalescing, I think, politically across partisan lines within Commonwealth countries that saw profound social change in a country that still struggles, I think, as we've seen lately in the news, to rebuild itself. Mr. Speaker, this is what is important, I think, to remember when we look at a bill like this. When I first came to this legislature, the province of Nova Scotia's budget was about $4 billion. Today, it's in excess of $8 billion, and as the Minister of Economic Development indicated, about $800 million is spent annually right now on procurement of goods and services by this government. And that is an enormous amount of expenditure, but even more importantly, Mr. Speaker, in some ways, it's an enormous amount of clout in terms of saying to all of those small, medium, and large businesses that do business with government that we have a certain standard that we're interested in seeing met for anybody who does business. And I remember in this chamber when I was first elected, the member of that time from Preston standing up and fighting really hard to get the government to put in place a policy that law firms in the province of Nova Scotia doing business with the government had to move in the direction of employing Aboriginal lawyers and lawyers who were from African Nova Scotian communities. And today that is the policy of this government, and it's an important policy. So, Mr. Speaker, I know you would agree with this, and members of the House agree with this policy. We need procurement policies that are fair, that are open, that are transparent, that are clear, that are cost-effective, but also that contain some ethical imperative in terms of using the enormous purchasing power of public dollars to not only benefit the taxpayer, but also to benefit our communities and more broadly, Mr. Speaker, the global as well as the local community. Mr. Speaker, we have, and I'm very pleased to hear the Minister of Economic Development endorse the principles of this Act in terms of the work that his department is doing to put in place a procurement policy with effective standards. Hopefully they will be in place when the Canada Games comes to Nova Scotia, which is going to happen, I think, in the not-too-distant future. And I'm hoping that we will avoid the spectacle that we're seeing with the Olympics, where the Canadian team in the Olympics, their uniforms have been contracted out, outsourced to companies outside of Canada. And this was in the news quite recently. And Mr. Speaker, we have a fine textile industry, not only in the province of Nova Scotia, but in this country. And with the Canada Games coming to Nova Scotia in the not-too-distant future, I'm looking forward to those procurement policies reflected in the principles of this Act, ensuring that our young men and women, athletes from this province, will not be decked out in uniforms that have been manufactured in countries like China. I think that particularly for national events of this magnitude, we really need to take an opportunity to show our flag in many ways, including the pride in our own manufacturing sector, Mr. Speaker. But I think it's important to understand that this bill shouldn't be characterized as protectionism, just protecting your own industries, which are very important, but at the same time, a bill like this and the principles in it can certainly be used to raise the standards of workers in other jurisdictions, Mr. Speaker, and I think that's also a very important aspect. We all recognize in this House that not every product that government procures or an agency gets in this province is made in the province of Nova Scotia, and that often we will have to go looking elsewhere for products outside of the province and probably outside of the country. But when we do that, Mr. Speaker, we should have some minimum requirements in place in terms of what it is that we are expecting for the wages and the working conditions of those people who make the products and the kind of health and safety that they have available to them. Mr. Speaker, I had the privilege a number of years ago of studying in the United Kingdom, and I was in a very international kind of program with workers, with students from all over the world. I had in my class students from South Africa, from Southern Asia. I had a colleague in my course who was a trade union organizer in Southern Asia, and he and his partner worked in many of the free trade zones throughout Southern Asia. And I can tell you that in those countries at that time, the conditions under which he did his work attempting to organize workers was fraught with danger. Quite often, the trade unions and the rights that we come to accept in this country as legitimate human rights are not a part of their system, and quite often governments have their own trade unions that they expect workers to belong to, and independent trade unions are outlawed, and people can go to jail and not have fair court process in these countries for being members and for attempting to organize and improve the wages, the working conditions, and what have you. One of my other colleagues, Mr. Speaker, was a student from Zimbabwe, and he was studying child labor on 4 continents. And Mr. Speaker, that's a whole other area of exploitation of workers in different countries throughout the world. So, Mr. Speaker, we need to set the bar. We need to have some minimum requirements, and this legislation would certainly, I think, at least give us the assurance that we keep in mind some moral imperatives beyond just the bottom line when we look at how we do business in the province of Nova Scotia. Thank you very much.
Order, please. The time allotted for debate on Bill 62 has now expired. The chair now recognizes the Honourable, the official opposition House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That concludes the official opposition's business for today, and now I turn it over to the Deputy House Leader of the Government.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the Honourable, the Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that you now do rise to meet again tomorrow. The hours will be from 3 p.m. till 7 p.m. After the daily routine and question period, public bills for second reading. The following bill numbers: Bill number 79, Bill number 126, 127, 130, and 131, 133, 148, 151, 156, 163, 167, 168, and 176.
Just for clarification, could the honourable member repeat the hours for tomorrow?
3 until 7 p.m. is my understanding.
Okay. Thank you. The motion before the House is for the House to rise and meet again tomorrow at 3 p.m. till 7 p.m. Is the House ready for the question? Question has been called. All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary minded, nay. Motion carried. We have arrived at the moment of interruption. The adjournment debate was chosen and announced earlier and won by the honourable member from Hants West. Be it resolved that members of this House salute the tremendous life and contributions of our province's Pumpkin King, Mr. Howard Dill. The chair now recognizes the honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's an honour to rise this evening to speak for a few minutes about a man well known around the world for some great things that he'd accomplished in a short 73 years. And it was about 24 hours ago now, actually. Well, it was a little around 7 o'clock, I guess, last night that received a call that Howard Dill had passed away, succumbed to that horrible disease, cancer, after quite a battle. Still came as a, as a bit of a shock to us all, and a shock not only to me, Mr. Speaker, but the people across North America and around the world, simply because Howie's great natured way in dealing with life and with the thousands and thousands of people that he met and adored, and they adored him as well. Mr. Dill was a predominant name and one in the agricultural circles in Windsor, West Hants for many years, and then came the late 70s and the early 80s. Pumpkins, as we've all come to know, have been grown in North America for around 5,000 years, they say, and they're low in calories and fat and sodium and high in fiber. They are indeed low in calories. Great sources of vitamin A and B, as well as potassium, protein, and iron. In the 1500s, Mr. Speaker, shortly after the French explorer Jacques Cartier explored the St. Lawrence region in North America, he reported finding something he named gross melons. That name was translated into English as pumpkins, and today we know that as pumpkins, of course. In saying this, Mr. Speaker, I have my doubts if Mr. Cartier, however, ever thought there would be a day when he'd see a single pumpkin that would weigh in at over 1,600 pounds. This is all because, of course, of Howard Dill and the Atlantic Giant pumpkin seeds. And in 2007, using Dill's Atlantic Giant seed, Mr. Joe Jutras broke a new historic world record with one weighing 1,689 pounds. Mr. Don Young from Iowa placing second in the world with one at